Good morning, and welcome to this month's Hamline Leo Lecture, timely talks that offer innovation and inspiration from Hamline thought leaders. I'm Molly Levy from Alumni Relations, and I'm pleased that you have joined us today. A few things before we get started. You will be muted and your camera will be off for today's presentation. If you have a question for our speaker, please use the Q&A icon in your Zoom dashboard on your screen. And if you're unfamiliar with Zoom, please click on Speaker View to see the speaker in a larger frame. You can hide or shrink the thumbnail videos on the right in order to better view the presentation. If you have questions about the logistics of today's webinar, please use the chat icon in your Zoom dashboard on your screen. There are a few of us ready to troubleshoot as we can. And finally, be patient with us as some of us are presenting from our homes. You could see or hear pets. I can hear a lawnmower right now. We all know technology can be unpredictable, but we are so pleased that we are all here together today. And with that, I am pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Lisa Ferguson-Stiegel, who's joining us there. Lisa is an associate professor of biology here at Hamline and teaches in the public health sciences and exercise science programs, and is the director of Hamline's Integrative Physiology Lab. She earned her PhD in exercise physiology from the University of Texas at Austin and received further training as an NIH postdoctoral fellow at the University of Minnesota Medical School in muscle physiology and aging biology. Dr. Ferguson-Stiegel earned her MS in exercise science from the George Washington University School of Public Health and Health Services, where she also completed graduate work in public health approaches to activity, nutrition, and health status. And with that, I'm going to turn the controls over to Dr. Stiegel.
All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to transition over to sharing my screen with you all so that you can see my presentation. So as you know, the title of my talk today is Exercise Improves Immune Function, Powerful Knowledge in the Time of COVID-19. I think that this is just a vastly important topic to talk about right now. All of us are living through incredibly challenging times. We're nervous, we're anxious, we're worried about this, this virus, as we should be. And it's so important to know the things that we can do to help ourselves and things that we can also tell others so that they can help themselves as well, be as healthy as possible. Of course, all the time, not just during a pandemic, but especially now. And so today I'm going to share with you evidence for why exercise improves immune function, and this can give you an enhanced immune system response when you're presented with a pathogen like COVID-19. So with that, I will start off with our roadmap for today, just to let you know what it is I'll be talking about. So firstly, I'm going to give you the take-home message first and foremost, because I don't know about you, but my COVID new normal brain in this time has an attention span of about 2.5 minutes on a good day. So if you hear nothing else I say today, the first 2 slides that I'll start with in my messaging is what I want you to remember. But I hope that you'll be hooked and you'll want to hear everything I have to say. But the first couple of slides are going to be the main take-home message in case you tune out and hear nothing else. I'll also tell you just a brief bit about my background and how I came to be interested in this topic to start with in terms of exercise and the immune system. It's kind of a fun story. Then I'll give you a brief overview of what is an incredibly complicated system. In my opinion, the immune system is the most complicated system of the body. I'm sure others would argue that their favorite system is as well, but the immune system is incredibly complicated. And so I'll try to give you just a very brief overview for the context of our talk and present evidence for the case for exercise as being something that does enhance our immune system and boost our immune response. To that end, there's 2 sort of classic graphs I'll share with you and talk you through. One is called a J-shaped curve of exercise, and the acronym here is URTI, upper respiratory tract infection risk. So URTI is sort of the bucket, right, for anything that affects the respiratory tract, so the upper respiratory tract, so the common cold and influenzas and even COVID could potentially fall into this category as well, although we're learning it affects a whole lot of systems, right? We'll also talk through what's called the open window hypothesis. So you're going to come away with so many cool things to talk about. When you're chatting with your friends, you can say, by the way, have you heard of the open window hypothesis? And you're going to sound amazingly cool. We'll also get to the heart of what kind of exercise are we talking about? What should we be doing? How long should we be doing it? And how intensely should we do it? I will definitely give you advice you can use today. And I'll close with why this is beneficial for those with underlying chronic disease, including heart disease, diabetes, obesity, as well as those who are elderly, because we know all of these people, chronic disease, obesity, the elderly, people with impaired immune function, these are most vulnerable to the severity of COVID. And so what I'm sharing with you today could be beneficial for these populations as well. So that's some good news. All right, so here's take-home slide number 1. If you remember nothing else. If you remember nothing else, remember this. About 30 minutes-ish of moderate intensity aerobic exercise, when performed most every day of the week consistently, will boost your immune function. This is true, known, proven science. What does this mean for us, though? It means that you are less likely to catch an infection if you encounter it. And also, we know that nothing's foolproof, right? Sometimes we get sick no matter what we do. But the science is pretty clear that if you're doing moderate intensity exercise most every day, you tend to have lessened severity of symptoms if you do get a respiratory infection. And the illness period is typically shortened. Now, I put an asterisk here because I want to be clear. I am definitely not saying, I don't think anyone out there is saying, if you exercise every day, you won't get sick. You know, we just know that's not true. And we probably all know people who are doing it right, exercising every day, no underlying conditions, who catch cold or the flu or, God forbid, COVID, right? So it's no guarantee, but it does give you the very best chance you can have to limit the severity if you get it, or hopefully not get it at all. So this is the exercise workload continuum. I'll be showing you this a couple times today. So in the exercise workload continuum, you have zero exercise, so a person who is completely sedentary and does no physical activity. All the way to the other side of the spectrum, someone who is actually over-exercising. Now, let me be clear, and we'll get to this later in the open window hypothesis. Most of us are never going to be that person. You know, if you're just exercising most days of the week, 30 to 60 minutes, you're not going to fall into that category. But if you're training for a marathon or an ultra endurance event, and you're not getting proper recovery and you're doing super long, intense workouts, you will fall into that category, most likely. And the interesting thing is, in either case, overtraining or not exercising at all, both cases weaken your immune system and lower your immune function and your chances for defending against a virus or a bacteria or any type of pathogen. The sweet spot, however, is here in the middle, 150 to 300 minutes per week of exercise. This boosts the immune system, and it's been shown in many, many, many studies over a few decades. This is not new. So the sweet spot is 150 to 300 minutes per week. So if you think about 30 minutes a day times 5 days a week, that's your 150, right? Certainly doubling that has no deleterious effects. It's just as good. So if you're like, you know what, I really like 45 minutes a day, or I like an hour a day, or I want to do 30 minutes a day every single day, not just 5, you will be just fine and your immune system will thank you. So this is the other slide I want you to remember if you remember nothing else. What do we know about exercise and immune function? What has been well documented? And by the way, for many of my sources, you'll see at the bottom, Neiman 2020, in this case, review article. There's lots of review papers out there that synthesize the research on this that I'm drawing from. So I've already said reduced risk of and severity of these infections, right? This happens through improved surveillance against pathogens. Your immune system is literally better able to surveil your environment and spot something that's just come in through whatever route, inhalation or whatever, and try to neutralize it. So you've got improved surveillance against pathogens if you're exercising most every day in the way I'm describing. This is also done through lowering stress hormones, particularly cortisol. We've probably all heard of cortisol as it's a survival hormone, but it can be very detrimental in terms of suppressing immune function. And cortisol is lowered by the type of exercise I'm describing, this moderate intensity, not 3-4 hours long. This will suppress cortisol, which helps remove that sort of check on the immune system and lets it function as it should. Exercise also lowers the systemic inflammatory response, and I'll touch on this a bit later. This effect that I'm talking about lasts during the exercise session and for a few hours afterwards. Now, how many hours that is depends on many factors, the type of exercise, the intensity, etc. But say a few hours, let's say 4-6 hours after. And then it just kind of goes back to your resting baseline. So you exercise, you get this boost, it lasts for a few hours, but it doesn't dip below your normal, right? So it may go back to your normal, but it stays there. So in other words, this is an acute effect, but it's transient, right? So in order to get the maximum benefit, you exercise regularly. That's where this most days of the week comes in. And that way you get that immune system bump most days of the week, and thus enhanced immune system function. This is true even in those with chronic conditions, including obesity and in aging. So there's some good news here. You might think, well, if someone already has heart disease and diabetes and they're 80 years old and also obese, it's just too late to enhance the immune system. The good news is it is not. This effect works even in those populations. So just to give you a little bit about my background so you know how I came to be interested in this stuff. Firstly, you should know that my undergrad is in English, technical writing. And after undergrad, I got super into cycling. I am now a runner, but back then I was a cyclist and I was really into it and got really fascinated by the training effect. Wow, what's happening in my body that's making me stronger and faster and fitter? And I started getting really interested in the idea of skeletal muscle physiology and the adaptations that occur inside the muscle cells. So it took me 2 years of prereqs as an English major to be accepted and get into a master's program at George Washington University. But there I did my master's in exercise science and totally fell in love with research. And in the process, I was training a lot. I was studying cyclists and I was a cyclist. And I was riding my bike all the time, but I was also overtraining and finding that I was getting sick more often with things like colds and, just minor annoyances like that. So I thought, well, what the heck, right? Exercise is good for you. Why am I getting sick? This is no fair. And so I started looking in the journals and in the literature, and I realized there was a whole subfield called exercise immunology. And my main intro to that was this paper, The Immune Response to Heavy Exertion, and it answered so many of my questions, but it also sparked so many more. There are people out there studying this, and I was just blown away by it. I thought, wow, I'm really interested in studying training adaptations in muscle, but this is a thing too. I kind of want to do this too. And the guy that wrote this paper is this guy, David Neiman, professor at Appalachian State University, a small school up tucked away in the mountains of North Carolina. I was already in a master's program. They didn't have a PhD program, so I couldn't go there to study, which I thought, bummer, I would totally do this if I could. So around this time, I went to my first scientific conference. It wasn't this one. This is a picture of another one, because I promise back in my day, there were no smartphones. This is a more recent one, but I was sitting in a conference much like this, listening to a talk, and I had my trusty paper with me, and I had it highlighted up, all 6 colors, I'm telling you, highlighted all over the place. And it was in my binder, and I glance over, there's a guy sitting 2 seats down from me, and I glance over and I see his name tag. Oh my gosh, it's that guy. It's the father of exercise immunology, and he's sitting right there, and I'm reading his paper. So I reach over and I tap him on the shirt sleeve and I say, "Excuse me." And he looks over and he smiles. And I pull out the paper, all highlighted up, and show it to him. I said, "I'm reading your paper." And I don't know why I did that. I mean, what a silly thing, right? But he just smiled and laughed and kind of shook his head. And he reached over and wrote a note and said, "Cute, let's definitely talk after this. Thanks for telling me." And so after the talk was over, he stayed behind and we chatted, and he said, "I'll answer any questions you have. You know, what you got?" And we talked and we talked, and he became a mentor to me then. He is still today. He actually recorded an interview with me to share with my class this spring and again this fall in exercise physiology on this topic. So you never know who's sitting next to you. And you might as well just reach out and say, "Hey, I'm reading your paper," because you never know. You'll become friends for life. So after that, I went on to the University of Texas at Austin to do my PhD. And we had an option to have subspecialties within our dissertation work. And so even though I was studying the training response, I also had the ability to do immune work as well, which was cool. So my lab at Hamline, pre-COVID, looks like this. This was last summer. I now study training adaptations and acute exercise responses in older athletes with the hopes of transferring that knowledge to how to improve physical function in everybody who is aging. And although I don't really get to do the fancy immune work that I used to be able to do at Texas, we still do some stuff with hormones like cortisol and looking at that type of response. And so hopefully this pandemic will end and we can get back in the lab again and I'd like to get back into some more immune work if I can find funding. Okay, so enough about me and how I got to this. Let's go back to this take-home message. So I've told you that 150 to 300 minutes a week is the sweet spot for exercise, and it will boost your immune function. But what is immune function, right? I say it a lot, but what does that mean? So let's talk a little bit about the immune system and how this works. So the immune system is broken into two branches, the innate immune system, and that's what we're born with. Then there's the adaptive immune system, which is what we develop as we encounter things over time. The two systems work together in a really nice partnership all of the time. So this graph is really cool because it shows sort of how this works. So up top you see the innate immune response and its contribution to an infection. And so this whole bottom graph here is you get an infection and then there's a response and then you clear that infection and now you have some memory, right, to defend against it in the future. So it kind of shows you the percent contribution of both of these systems and how they overlap and work together. So we know, if you look over at the left side, we know that there's a threshold level of anything, any pathogen to cause infection. So for example, one virus particle is not going to cause an infection. Your immune system, your innate immune system, is going to destroy that pretty much right on. There has to be a threshold, and for every pathogen it's different, and we don't know yet what that is for COVID, how many viral particles it takes. And it obviously depends on the immune system status of the person, how much of a threshold there is. For someone whose immune system is not functioning properly, that threshold will be much lower than for someone who has a high functioning immune system. So once that threshold is reached, that pathogen can establish an infection and the innate immune system is still working to kick it. But then this inductive phase brings in the adaptive immune response too. And together they work really hard to clear that out and then have immunological memory in the form of antibodies. So the cells we're talking about here, don't worry, I'm not going to go into every single cell here, but I want to just show on the right-hand side of the screen is mostly the innate immune system cells. On the left side is the adaptive immune system in general. There's some crossover. The natural killer cell is more associated with the innate response. But the cells of interest for our discussion are the T cells as well as the B cells. B cells are the ones that make and secrete antibodies and then remember for when you encounter them again. And within the innate immune system, neutrophils and macrophages are really important in that sort of first line of defense. Macrophages are super cool because they are a lot like Pac-Man. They go around and eat up stuff, viruses, bacteria, whatever it is. They eat this stuff up and present pieces of it to the T cell, so the T cell can go talk to the B cell. And I'll show you that in a minute because that's so cool. So this is a beautiful image, and I know it's kind of like small, but don't worry about reading the words, just focus on the images. Beautiful image out of nature showing a coronavirus entering the body, and comes to the ACE2 receptor, enters the body, and then that initiates the immune response that's on the lower part of this image. So that virus gets ingested by an antigen-presenting cell, and in this case, let's call it a macrophage because that's one of the things they do. Like I said, it's like Pac-Man, chomps this thing up and then spits little pieces out, presents it to one of the two types of T cells. So there's two types of T cells. There's the helper T, and oh, I'm sorry, I have arrows here to guide you, and I forgot to turn them on. There's the virus, there's the macrophage. Here's our T cell. So we have helper T cells and cytotoxic T cells. Cytotoxic one is right there. The helper T cell is called a helper because it helps a bunch of things. It talks to B cells over here, and it talks to its cytotoxic T cell friends on the right side and says, hey, the macrophage just gave me this particle. I think this is influenza A, or I think this is coronavirus, or whatever the case may be. It gives particles to these cells and says, go get them. This is bad, go get it. The B cell then produces antibodies. The cytotoxic T cell goes and actually destroys infected cells. Now, it's also important to remember that within the B cell job, they develop that long-lived memory so that antibodies can be generated again if you're infected again. Mind you, we still don't know how this process works with COVID-19. But you may have heard that antibodies, oh geez, they may not last very long. But even if that's true, we don't know what that means yet, because plasma cells can then remember the response and ramp them up again if they encounter it again. So it may not be, the biggest worry in the world if they decrease over time. But also it's thought that T cells may retain some type of memory as well and be able to quickly step back in if a pathogen is encountered again. So when you hear antibodies decline, oh no, just know that we don't know yet what that means, and it may not be as dire as it sounds. So what evidence do we have that exercise boosts the immune system function against viruses like COVID-19? Now I want to be clear, we haven't yet studied COVID-19 because it is new, right? We haven't had time to do the studies to see this yet. However, we do have data from other coronaviruses as well as adenoviruses and rhinoviruses. Many of these things cause common colds, and we also know about influenza. So within the coronavirus family, as you may already know, there are 7 known types, 4 that cause mild to moderate infections like the cold. We've probably all had a coronavirus-induced cold in our lifetimes, probably more than one. These have been well studied with exercise. Then there are 2 known before our current situation. There were 2 that cause severe illnesses, the virus that causes SARS and the one that causes MERS, right? And of course now our new virus, SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19. So what we know about exercise and its benefits is not on COVID, right, because it's too new, but it's on other viruses that behave in similar fashions. So this is the J-shaped curve I mentioned in my roadmap, which shows you exercise and the resistance to upper respiratory tract infections. So this is, in my view, really convincing evidence of the power to do moderate intensity regular exercise. So on the x-axis on the bottom, you see sedentary behavior, moderate intensity exercise, and this is assumed to be on a regular basis, not just once, and high intensity, high duration, more extreme exercise. So many hours a week, prolonged, exhaustive exercise. So it'd be more along the lines of elite athletes who train literally hours and hours a day. On the y-axis, you see risk of infection, low, average, and high. So obviously what we want is to be low risk of infection, right? So it turns out those who don't exercise at all are at an average risk, which is, you might think, wait, what? I thought that's, I thought they were at more risk. Well, it's kind of average. And in some cases, as you slide more a little active, you start to see that risk lower. But the sweet spot, again, is that moderate intensity exercise that we're talking about here. That's the lowest risk of infection that there is. But once you start getting into those extreme ranges, your risk of infection is actually quite high. So again, all the evidence points toward moderate intensity exercise performed regularly. I want to touch a brief moment here on the high intensity exercise, so the overtraining part of the spectrum here, because I definitely work with athletes, have friends who fall into this camp, and I'm always like trying to say, particularly now during this COVID time, you might want to adjust your training. This is where we get to the open window hypothesis. So the open window hypothesis postulates that the risk of an upper respiratory tract infection is greater in the hours after prolonged and exhaustive exercise, not the moderate to vigorous stuff. So, you go out and you do 60 minutes of running, or you do a 90-minute bike ride. This is not what I'm talking about. It's those 2, 3, 4 exhausting long efforts that are the problem. And the problem looks like this. So here, I don't have times associated with this because, as you'll see, it really depends on the type we're talking about. But on the x-axis, there's a period where you're exercising, and there's a period after exercise, so recovery. On the y, you have immune cell counts. So how many immune cells are floating around the body looking for stuff to clear, right? They're looking for pathogens to neutralize, ready to protect you. When you do the moderate 30 to 60, even 90 minutes moderate intensity exercise, this is the way it looks. Immune cell counts go up during exercise, and they stay up, and they kind of start trending down, and then as you recover, they're still up. Notice, so this is your baseline. I should have mentioned this black dashed line is your baseline resting level of immune cell counts. So you're still up above baseline for a few hours after exercise is done. But notice you never dip below baseline, right? Well, unless you do exhaustive prolonged exercise, and then it looks like this. You do get that transient rise during the bout, but as the hours go on, it starts to go back down, and then as soon as you start recovering from exercise, notice that you don't get that heightened surveillance. You actually go below your resting baseline level. And what that translates to is natural killer cells that are constantly looking for viruses, tumor cells, bacteria. They don't function so well. They may still be present. It's not like they completely disappear, but their activity is suppressed. The lymphocytes are in fewer numbers and their activity is suppressed. Your T cell function, which I just showed you earlier, is really important. Lowered function, lowered counts. And that can last, depending on what you did, the nature, the prolonged nature, the exhaustive nature of your exercise, for up to 21 hours. You encounter someone during this time period who has a pathogen, has influenza, has a cold, perhaps COVID, you are more likely to get infected by that pathogen in that case. So I would say to you, if you're training for a marathon, or if you're doing ultra stuff, or my personal advice to you would be keep it at 90 minutes or less. You can do vigorous intervals and speed work and all that, but keep it 60 to 90 minutes for now, and you'll do yourself a favor. So is there a preferred or optimal type of exercise? Absolutely. I'm going to tell you what it is. This is the secret to life. It is the one that you will enjoy and actually do, right? So on the more serious note, aerobic exercise, moderate to vigorous, but it should be something you enjoy. Because if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to want to do it, right? And so find something you like and do it. So the duration, how long it should last, depends on how intense you're going. So if you decide, you know what, I really love brisk walking. My knees won't support running, but walking's cool. I'm good with that. I can do 30, 45 minutes a day of walking. Great. So you want to get 30 to 45 minutes of walking. Brisk, not a stroll, but brisk, heart pumping, breaking a sweat, still able to talk to a friend if you're walking, and hey, if you're that close together, please wear a mask. But if you're not that close together, you needn't worry about it if you can maintain social distance from others. Bike ride, going out for a bike ride is awesome. Unless you're doing high intensity work, 30, 45 an hour, that's great. If you're one of those people who likes to do really high intensity interval training, so HIIT workouts, high intensity interval training, then actually it can shorten the duration somewhat. We don't know, and I was just talking to Dr. Neiman about this recently. The studies haven't been done to show what's the shortest window you could do. So for example, could you do a 10-minute high intensity workout and get the same effect as a 45-minute brisk walk? That's yet to be clarified. We don't know. But based on what we do know, we think probably if you did short bursts that were sufficient to get your heart rate up really high for a few minutes at a time, that may be good as well. But if I were you, I would err on the side of 30 minutes of moderate or say 20 minutes of high intensity most days of the week. Now, does resistance training offer the same benefit? There's not as much research to answer this question. What is out there is kind of mixed and small sample sizes, so hard to interpret. But so far, we don't think so, because heart rate responses are not the same to resistance exercise unless you're doing some type of circuit training where you get your heart rate up and stays up for quite a long time. So moderate to vigorous, 30 to 60 minutes, or high intensity interval training, you could potentially do 15 to 20 minutes if you're doing high intensity intervals separated by recoveries, and you do this, say 10 times. What's the minimum time though? We just don't know. Couple more points about what exercise can do for you. It can reduce systemic inflammation, and we know inflammation is linked to many, many, many chronic diseases, right? Low-grade inflammation seems to be the biggest problem. There's high-grade inflammation that's associated with some diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and certain cancers, but low-grade inflammation is more common in the public due to obesity and aging. And I'll get more to both of those topics in a moment, but we know that low-grade systemic inflammation is linked to a lot of those diseases I just mentioned, and largely it's due to other parts of the immune system that I didn't mention earlier. So these other players, the complement system and cytokines, are major players underlying inflammation. Cytokines are incredibly strong regulators of the immune response and inflammation. And this is a pretty colorful but really busy slide, but I put it here just to show you all of the letters here in white, IL-3, IL-10, IL-6, etc. All of these little letters here represent cytokines, and they are tiny little proteins that serve to ramp up the immune response and then tamp it down. So if you hear in COVID cases of the cytokine storm that's associated with rapid, severe decline in death, these are what they're talking about. These are cytokines. Some are pro-inflammatory, some are anti-inflammatory. So when you get attacked by a pathogen, your immune cells secrete cytokines to amplify the response. They rally the troops and say, we got to fight this thing. Come on, we got to get an inflammatory response going because we need to survive this. Then, ideally, anti-inflammatory cytokines go up once the infection starts to clear and turn off the ones that were doing all the work and say, hey, you're good now. Things are getting better. You can go back now. Problem is, sometimes that system of regulation gets out of whack and the anti-inflammatory cytokines aren't able to counter the pro. We do know, however, that obesity is a major risk factor for severity of COVID-19 and as well as getting infected with the virus to start with. And this sort of cytokine imbalance is kind of already in place. So with obesity, there's chronic systemic inflammation and out of proportion levels of those inflammatory cytokines already present. We know that visceral fat and adipose tissue secretes a lot of inflammatory cytokines and not as many anti-inflammatory cytokines. And this is linked to type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. But unfortunately, it's also linked to COVID-19 risk and severity. But as I mentioned earlier, even in those with chronic conditions, including obesity, everything I've said about exercise is still true. It can still help the immune system. Also in the elderly who we know have lowered immune function. And this is due to what we call immunosenescence, mouthful, immunosenescence, along with lots of things going on with aging, right? For those of us who feel the effects of aging all the time, we know the immune system actually declines in its responsiveness as we age. And that's why the elderly are at higher risk of any type of respiratory infection, whether it be influenza or colds or bacterial pneumonia, COVID. So one big player in this is the helper T cells that I mentioned to you earlier. They actually are affected by the aging process, so they don't work as well. And if they don't work as well, they're not interacting with our B cells as well to produce antibodies. They're not interacting with our cytotoxic T cells as well to destroy infected cells. This is in part why elderly individuals respond less well to vaccines than young individuals. The cells that get affected by aging are some of the ones I started out talking about earlier that are so important to our defense. So our macrophages and dendritic cells that act like Pac-Man, our neutrophils that also go around and kill stuff that's invading us. And of course, our antibody producing and immunological memory producing cells, as well as our T cells. And unfortunately, we get more pro-inflammatory cytokines as we age. So, the biggest thing to know of all of this, of everything I've said, is now what can happen with the immune system and why the elderly are more at risk and those with chronic conditions and obesity are more at risk. But the good news is you can use the knowledge of what we've learned about exercise to reduce your risk and exercise most every single day, and you'll give yourself the best chance against all of this. And I'm going to back up a slide here to say that the T cells have been shown to respond very well to exercise in terms of their ability to function. And so when we hear about T cells and their role in COVID-19, just remember, hey, exercise helps these. Exercise bolsters these, even in the immunosenescent state. So as we age, exercise bolsters our T cells, right? So a lot of cells are affected, but we know T cells are so important, and exercise is definitely going to give them a boost that you need to protect against many types of infections. So knowledge is power, and so is exercise. And so I think it's really important to sort of take this message and think about, okay, how can I now, if you're not already doing this, I hope you are, but if you're not, I hope I've inspired you to start. And if you know someone who needs this information, by all means, tell them, hey, I heard about this, let me tell you all about it. And I think it's a message worth sharing. So I want to thank you for your time and attention and interest. I put my little PSA here to remember to mask up every time you're in public, even outdoors when you're around other people that aren't your household. If you are anywhere near 6 feet or less, and stay home whenever you can. Let's all do our part. I think that's an important message to share. And I'll just leave this slide up as we go to questions. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Lisa. And I am going to start us off with a few questions. Again, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A button on your Zoom dashboard. And if we have more questions than we're able to get to today, you can go ahead and email them to alum@hamline.edu, and we'll make sure that, that Lisa gets them as well. I'm gonna start us off with a question of my own, which is, has there been research on kids or teenagers with regards to immune function and exercise and the benefits there?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, for the very first question, that's an answer I don't have.
Sorry.
Most of what's been done over the decades has been in sort of that college age to adult to elderly range. I actually don't know if there's been a lot done in children, but that's, especially as we think about schools reopening and such, that's a great question.
Here's some more. I'm just gonna fire them at you, Lisa. How would you suggest balancing exercising outdoors versus in a public gym?
I would not go to a public gym. I would not go to a gym. I have friends who are gym owners. I feel so bad for people in that line of work and who own those small businesses, but that is too risky. Outdoors, recently there was an epidemiologist quoted in the New York Times that said, outdoors will save us. And that really made an impression on me because it's so true. To be able to exercise, you know, if normally your game was to go to the gym and hop on the treadmill or the elliptical, go outside. And of course, it's unfortunate Minnesota is not conducive to that 365 days of the year. But right now, get outside and do it. If you, if you have a treadmill or a bike at home, you can use that indoors too. I worry about individuals who don't have access to equipment at home, who may not have, who may not feel safe in their neighborhoods going for a walk, and who exercised at community centers that are now closed. I really worry about a lot of those folks, and I just say, figure out a way to make it happen that works for you safely. The other day, thinking about this, I decided to see if I could make vacuuming and dusting my house, which definitely needed it, a workout. And so I slapped on my heart rate monitor that I usually run with, and I vacuumed and dusted, but I did it really quickly, and it looked insane, I just want to say. Thankfully, no one saw it. But I made sure that I was moving quickly the whole time, and I would stop and do squats, and then I would do jumping jacks, and then I would keep vacuuming. It made it a little less miserable to clean, to be fair. But I got 23 minutes of a workout that was the equivalent of one of my just regular jogs. So there are ways you can figure out to try to do it, as best you can.
Here's another one that's sort of tied into that. How does heat affect the time that we need to exercise outside? I live in Dallas.
Ooh.
Hi, Alexis. And when I get done at grad school at 7 p.m., it's still 95 degrees outside. How long should I be exercising?
Oh, I think that's one of my former students. Hi. Yay. Yeah. Oh, I mean, I went to grad school in Austin. I know it's brutal. Early morning or late is unfortunately your best bet. And I know with the grad school schedule and all that, it's hard. But exercising in the heat and getting really hot is not awesome for the immune response in terms of that recovery period. There's not been a lot of great work done on how much it affects the immune response in general, but it impacts that recovery period, and that's going to impact your immune system, I'm positive. So as best as you can, try to get out early.
So Lisa, we had a request to show slide 2 again. So I wonder if you can pull that up, and I'm going to keep asking questions, but I wonder for our participant who would like to see slide 2 again, if you could pull that one up.
Yep.
While I queue up a next question.
So when we say, okay, so I'll share my screen, and I'm not sure if this is the right slide, but you can tell me. So the second slide technically was the roadmap slide, which was this.
Here we go. And I'll mention for everyone participating too that the recording for this will be up on our website on Monday. If you do want to go back and refer it to anything later, you can do that as well. So Lisa, maybe we can leave this up for a minute or two while I keep going with the questions.
I'm wondering, and maybe the attendee can let you know if it was this slide or was it this one, the second of the take-home message slides.
Okay, I'll watch to see.
Yep.
In the meantime, discuss weightlifting, just 3 pounds, nothing heavy.
So the key with weightlifting, I mean, there's different goals, right? Like, so weightlifting is obviously incredibly important for bone density, bone health, muscle strength and mass. Will it boost the immune system? It's not likely to, unless it's done in such a fashion that heart rate stays up and it becomes more aerobic as well. So there are gyms that have, over the years, have developed like circuit training programs, you know, where you might do a couple of sets of lifting and then go run around the gym and then maybe jump rope for a couple of minutes and lift some more and then do another aerobic, you know. That I think would safely fall into the immune boosting category, but weightlifting by itself, whether it's heavy or light, is not likely to have the immune boosting effects that we're hoping for.
How about, oh, and we did hear from our participant, second take home slide. So I think we're on track there. Here's a question. I am 77 and walk 2 to 3 hours, 6 to 9 miles almost every day. Am I over exercising?
Okay, repeat that. Repeat the amount to me.
77 and walk 2 to 3 hours, 6 to 9 miles almost every day. Is that over exercising?
No, I don't think so. The reason I say that is because it sounds like moderate to brisk walking. If you were running that amount every day, I'd say, yeah, I'd like to see you back that off. But it's duration and intensity both that we're concerned with, right? And so if the duration is fairly long, but the intensity is low, that's not that's not problematic. But if the intensity is high and long duration, then problem. Where we don't have clear evidence is like, what about right in the middle? So in this case, it's really long. What if you're doing, say, hill work in the middle of this, where you're going up and down really steep hills? You know, I guess I need to know more about how that works. But if it's staying in that low to moderateness, I think you're fine. And kudos to you for doing that. That's amazing.
How about this? Do you know of good aerobic exercises for an 82-year-old man with polio, I think is the intended word there, who can't walk without a walker?
Oh, that's a great question. In normal times, I would say if you have access to a pool, like a community pool or a YMCA, YWCA, anything like that, water therapy is beautiful for that. Of course, this is not normal times. So that gets super complicated. As access safely, you know, if there's an outdoor pool that you can access, gosh, I think that would be amazing. Otherwise, there are, and I know I bought one in my lab. It was $25, I believe, and it's a cycle ergometer bike. It looks like a bike pedal, but it's on a stand, and you can actually use it with your arms. And so you can actually exercise by arm cycling. And I'm gonna stop the share here just so, it's maybe a unit that's like this tall and it sits on a tabletop, and you just grab the pedals with your hands. And believe it or not, I mean, that will be a very sufficient workout. You know, you can do it while watching TV so you don't get bored. Yeah, that could definitely work, as well as a stationary bike if you have access to that as well.
Can you quickly review what happens on the cellular level when coronavirus infects the body and what happens in the body response?
Let me go back to the one slide. So one piece of that answer is, pardon me for a second while I kind of quickly run through these to find the right slide. Part of the response to this question, though, is we don't know what all systems it affects yet, right? Typically, some of the other mild coronaviruses that we know more about, the ones that cause a cold, they enter in the manner you see here. You know, they enter the body, they replicate within the upper respiratory tract, the throat and the lungs. Our T cells get engaged by our macrophages and other cells that, you know, help eat stuff. They alert our cytotoxic T cells. They go help clear them out directly by literally killing those virus cells. And then the B cells do their thing with the antibodies. But the thing is, you know, with SARS-CoV-2 that causes COVID-19, we're still learning what all tissues it affects, right? Because now there's evidence that it may, in fact, actually have effects directly on the vascular system. And so some patients are being found with blood clots throughout the body. They did not have blood clots before. They did not have a clotting problem before. This causes kidney damage and kidney failure. It causes liver damage. So we don't know what all SARS-CoV-2 affects in the body yet. We're still learning that. We know, like, you know, we kind of know the respiratory piece, but it seems like there's this other stuff that's happening, at least in a lot of patients. And of course, there's a neurological part too. So the short answer is this is how it works in general, but we don't quite know what SARS-CoV-2's path is on the cellular level.
Does yoga help the immune response?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. So not in the way that I've described here that exercise does, because the thing with the moderate aerobic exercise is that part of this whole response centers around the heart rate going up and more blood getting pumped out from the heart, right? The whole body getting just perfused with more blood flow. What that does is it moves immune cells from where they kind of live in the peripheral tissues out into the circulation. So the higher the heart rate, the more blood is pumping through the body per minute, more immune cells get pumped through the body per minute, and so they can surveil and look for pathogens. With yoga, the heart rate typically doesn't get up like that, I guess, unless you're doing some kind of power yoga, and then I'm not sure if that's, personally for me, yoga has a different purpose than aerobic exercise, right? I want to calm down with yoga. That being said, there's not a lot of work on yoga and the immune response, but we do know it lowers cortisol levels, and cortisol is immunosuppressive. So theoretically, if you are living with stress, and we all are right now, right? Yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, mindfulness practice, all of these things can help lower cortisol levels, and that cannot not be good for our immune system. There's just not a lot of work on that. But I say yes, yoga, and yes, meditation.
So I think we have time for one more question. There are a few questions here that I think I can go back and collect. So those of you who've got a question in the queue that we didn't get to today, I'm going to endeavor to figure out how to respond to you directly or get your question to Professor Stiegel after this. But let's close with this question. Thanks for a great presentation. I know you study immune response and exercise, but as an informed scientist, what's your level of optimism about a COVID vaccine? The common cold is a coronavirus for which we don't have a vaccine, and we've known about colds forever.
You know, I'm hopeful as a scientist and person. I'm hopeful on the vaccine front, but you know, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of viruses for which a vaccine has eluded us, you know, for many, many years. There's probably more viruses for which we don't have vaccines, right, than those we do. Obviously, we don't know. You know, I think that the good news is that early trials look pretty good, you know. So I feel more hopeful that yes, we will find an effective vaccine in the next year. I really do, professionally. My worry from the public health hat side of things is that people will not want to take the vaccine, right? And then if that doesn't happen, our herd immunity situation isn't going to be great, you know? And so we just really are going to need to educate people about the benefits of the vaccine. We already have that battle with the regular flu vaccine, you know? So we're just going to need to really educate people that it's important, that it's safe, but we need the data to show that so that people can trust it. For now, though, we just have to do the best we can. And I do want to say, in studies that have looked at immune function and what's associated with a great functioning immune system, in addition to exercise, one thing that's kept appearing in studies is people who eat 3 or more servings of fruits and veggies a day typically have better immune function. So go out and eat your blueberries, you know, your veggies, like eat that stuff too. Diet's in there too. I don't want to leave that out of the equation. It's important also.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you very much. And like I said, there are a few questions that we didn't have time to get to today, but I'm pretty sure we can figure out a way to pass those along and get answers to you. And if something comes up later, Professor Stiegel has said that, you know, email the alumni account, and she and I will go back and forth and keep your and get some answers to you as well.
Can I just address, there was I just now opened the chat window and saw the question about starting to walk 2 miles a day. I'm obese and was worried that I'm overdoing it since I'm sore in the mornings. You're right, you shouldn't be worried about that. You're doing fine. You're sore in the mornings just because it's new to your muscles. I always tell people, take that as a sign that, you know, stuff's happening. Now, if you're injuring yourself, that's a different story. But if you're walking 2 miles a day, keep it up, and kudos to you for doing it. You're doing your body good things.
Very motivated to get back on track with exercise after this. I'll tell you, thank you very much. So thank you again, Lisa. Thank you so much to all of you for participating today. We should have a recording of this up on our website on Monday. So if you want to reference anything, or if you want to share it with a friend, please feel free to do that. The other thing I want to tell you is that we're planning now for our next round of Leo lectures from Hamline. So stay tuned. You'll see information on social media and email and our website. We love suggestions, either of a great speaker, faculty member who you've worked with in the past, or a topic that you kind of want us to see if we can explore and find somebody to speak about. We'd be happy to take those ideas. And then you will receive a survey after this event. We take a survey after all of our alumni events, and so you can give us ideas there as well. And with that, thank you again, Professor Stiegel, and everybody have a great, hot in Minnesota, but healthy weekend. Thanks again.